Greetings, everyone. Nick Ottinger here with Team Conti Sim Performance at Sonoma and Xfinity Series this week. So we had one week where we're at Chicago Street Course, correct? And it's a bumpier version of really racing on the streets and having to deal with some left and right turns. So here we're at Sonoma, a little bit more of elevation change, and especially going through turn 2 and turn 3. But this week I'm gonna give you guys a precise descriptive avenue on what I would do at Sonoma, and I'm gonna let this play through for the first 2 laps here. So these are going to be very difficult laps. This combination I've always felt like when you go to a road course is probably one of the most difficult challenges because of the elevation changes, having to have patience on entries and not overshooting entries because of how costly they will be. So with that said, I'll let this play through for a couple laps. That's a couple laps here. So I would like to dissect, obviously, these corners as I do every week with you guys. And I'm going to go to the first lap and really focus on how we're approaching this uphill elevation, right? So as you see here, we're at start finish line, starting our lap. And very important to make sure we're lifting and getting as close as we can to this wall at this apex. So we're setting up for a turn 2 up the hill. And you can see how I had a tighter line going up the hill those 2 laps I did, right? So let's slow it down. Turning away from the wall and we're lifting, right? We're not full lift, but there may be a point where you're in traffic where you actually have to lift fully so you can see this apex. Or if you just need to lift early, just lift early in this session because it's more important to set up for having a tighter line and getting some cleaner air to the left fronts going up until this turn 2 entry phase. So now we're rolling into this apex here. You can see partial throttle, still partial throttle, and now I'm giving a little bit more throttle, right? And we're past apex. We're pretty much just before pit exit, the pit exit wall. You see the cones here. So now I don't have the front grip to keep the speed that we're carrying and how much front turn I have and the steering angle, I don't have the grip. The front's just not turning, right? So I have to lift, give some actual capability back to the front end. And now this is the phase, completely in this rolling phase, where now I'm going to get back to a partial throttle to help gain some entry speed back and make sure my line is tight. So let's look at this, back to some partial throttle. And now I'm in this, angle. I'm already thinking ahead. I'm in this angle where I want to keep this left front in this phase right here, this lighter asphalt right below this yellow line to the inside of it. And you can see I'm in a braking and throttle phase here. Now I'm into the braking phase to where I'm slowing my entry down. And now I downshift from third to second. Okay. And why it is important to make sure you're off the brake here is because you don't want to add more force to the front and steering angle to the front to hold a tighter line once you're actually fully compressed in this phase. Reason being, so you're not adding front resistance. You're not sliding the fronts in this section. So I'm going to slow this down some more. You can see I put pretty much 3/4 of the car here, cutting this lane, right? So let's give it a chase view so you guys can see how much of an angle this is. Look at it. 3/4 of the car essentially where the right front's going to cross, just be right here and not cross here. So see this angle, my left front, how I like to attack this is my left front. I want to keep this angle now to where I have the front turning to almost clip this curbing and utilize this curbing, because the area where I want to actually get to the straight braking phase here is to make sure I'm as far left as possible so I can actually use the braking and my directional change to the right to slow me down. So see, I'm in a rolling phase now. I'm going to get back to the brake here very soon. I clip this curbing, I hop it, and now I'm into the braking phase. Straight line braking as much as possible. Look at my directional change to the right. And you can see I'm going to start adding some more wheel input, and I'm decreasing some brake pedal to make sure I'm not adding more slip at the peak of this hill. Because once I know I have the speed how I need, have the front turning where I need, my mindset shifts to, okay, now I have many years of experience of this track, right? But now I know how much real estate I have to the exit curbing here. So back to partial throttle. This is mainly to get back to maintenance throttle and maintain some center speed and really just not take too much speed out to where I'm actually driving on top of this curbing right here. As you can see, it's a taller peak. The peak of this is a lot higher compared to the center of this curbing and then down right here. So that's why very consistent on not trying to drive on top of it. I like to use pretty much a quarter of it if possible. And why that is because I don't really want to shift this balance and put the right side higher to where I'm actually in the throttle here. I don't want to change the height of this curbing and get the car in a rebounding phase and wait for a split second for the rear to stabilize, okay? That's my mindset for it. Now, you can see coming out of this corner, all this real estate that I was talking about, right? Now I'm getting to a little bit more linear throttle. I'm using all this curbing as much as I can and trying to exit as straight as possible. Later on in a run, you're going to be hugging the right side of that curbing off of 2 more frequently, just so you can actually get to a straighter approach on your partial throttle. Now we're still in second gear, very minimal point where we're 100% throttle. This section, we're obviously going to a downhill compression zone, and you want to get majority of your heavier braking done before you start getting to this compression point. You can see here, I'm still turning, adding more wheel input. Everything I've mentioned before, max wheel input, you want to make sure you're getting completely off the brake or as limited brake pedal as you can, so you got the front turning. And now I'm going to be off the brake. Objective here, hug this side of the curbing as much as possible with your left front. And partial throttle, because now this directional change here Very important. You don't need to be completely off the gas if you have your speed correct from this left-hander, right? So objective is ultimately turn back to the right, make sure you have complete trust in the car turning, and now once you actually get completely back to the right where you have max wheel input, your objective here is not to curb hop this angle too much, but clip it with enough confidence to where you can stay partial throttle, okay? So you can see here, I was still in the throttle, and now once I'm obviously directionally back turning to the right, now I'm really just trying to pivot the car essentially where I need to hit this angle like I want. And I do get off completely off the gas, but now I'm right back on it, and I'm going to clip this curbing, okay? Because I want to make sure my center speed's good, my apex speed's good, and I pretty much clip it. Now it's a blind crest here, right? Like you don't know where the curbing is at exit, which is very difficult to realize, but you can see I'm trying to use this exit angle that I see here to where I'm partial throttle. And once I get to the peak of this, I can start realizing from my visuals that here's the angle, all the way down here. And I'm at the peak of this. I'm going to get a little bit free with all this throttle because the front end is light in this moment, right? And with this being rear dominant car, of pivoting the car, it's going to break free in this area because it's just very difficult to see and it's a blind corner. So now that I know I can use all this and use this curbing, I'm going to use it. Second gear still. Now here's a zone that is very difficult. This is obviously the NASCAR long version here, and we're essentially gonna be braking just at that start of that angle for NASCAR long version. But now we're gonna stay in second gear. This zone right here is pretty bumpy. The splitter's gonna have some contact, and you want to make sure you have this car slow down enough to when you start angling into this corner apex, you can start getting completely off the brake. You can see the more wheel input I add, the closer I get to that apex, I'm completely off the brake. I will clip this right front on this curbing, but you don't want to clip it right here, okay? The furthest right. You want to just clip it by halfway or just a quarter of it. And that's just so you're not having a rebounding phase. Like you see this shift right here? You see this shift of the height? That's us hitting the curbing, and now we're in a rebounding phase. This is a very tricky corner, one of the trickiest areas on the track because of having to make some time and not overshooting it. And you see I'm partial throttle. I use a lot of throttle over this and a lot of wheel, so I push it tight once I cross over this curbing to where lap 2 I nailed it like I wanted to. But I use a lot of real estate on exit, and now I got to get back to the angle I need, and I'm not full throttle, right? I cross that curbing, and now I'm just using all the real estate I can. Now I'm full throttle in a straight line. Still second gear once again. That's my lowest point on the track, just to let you know. I use all the real estate I can for this hairpin. Again, wheel input, want to make sure I'm getting completely off at my max wheel angle. You can see I'm adding more wheel input, max wheel angle. I'm not clipping this curbing on purpose because, again, I don't want that rebounding trait of where I need to get rear traction and delaying that response and momentum that I'm trying to carry. So partial throttle, still second gear. I like to hug this curbing enough, to where you're not gonna jump the left rear. You're just gonna actually get some grip and find some grip on this paint and trying to hug for this exit as well. Still partial throttle, second gear. This area later on in the run, you will definitely be shifting in third once you pretty much pivot the right front and turning back to the right after jumping this and clipping it. So still second gear. Now, the S's here can be tricky because a lot of people overshoot it. My mentality is just lift a little bit, focus on your center momentum, and make sure you have the front turning and the rear kind of pivoting at the same rate. The front turn, the rear's honestly swinging around at the same feeling, and not too edgy. Your objective here is just to be smooth. Just to be smooth. I'm in partial throttle phase. Now directly back to the right, like we talked about for the peak of a couple of these corners, is making sure we're setting the car back to the right with limited throttle. And then if we need to get completely off of it, we can. But this zone, you're much quicker. You're much quicker. You want to get we talk about the curb and heights. You don't want to clip the height of this, the tallest part of this curb. You want to clip just enough to where you're getting the right front, using all this real estate that you can without, again, getting into a rebounding phase off these curbings. So you're delaying momentum. So right there, I delayed some momentum because I obviously got to the taller part of the curbing. Now I have to wait just a hair longer through this peak to get to partial throttle and linear throttle, because now my exit angle is a little bit compromised because I have to counter steer over this peak. Much like we're in these other elevation changes, we're at the height of this corner, right? We're at the crest of this corner exit. And again, we have a little counter steering trait, which is it's going to be common here. So now, what you guys did not see is staying in third gear, right? So now I'm going to go back and let this play through since we talked about this. We talked about shifting from second to third here, right? Now I'm going to let this play through. And you can see I'm just in third gear. Stay in third gear all the way in this section, and also in this directional change back to the left. You can see I'm not full throttle. That's as designed because I can go full throttle to this point, but then if I do, I have to really get the car to turn in this phase, and my angle is going to be compromised because I'm going to be worried about slowing it down earlier. So here, I'm using this angle all the way to get to this curbing, and now I'm into this braking phase, just limited braking, enough to slow it down, and then I'll get to my rolling phase that you just seen before I got to more brake pedal. And that's just so I can actually limit my entry speed. And now I'm in this straight line braking phase here as much as possible, with the angle of this car as far left as possible to angle back to my directional change to the right. So once we get this left front crossing this, off this curbing, very important to be limiting your brake, getting off the brake, as you can see what I'm doing. So we use a lot of heavy braking, in a straight line, and then we're getting off the brake, turning back to the right, like we were talking about. And now I got the front turn. Now I can actually start trailing off the brake completely and use this curbing to my advantage. And I use too much of it. Realistically, I would not use this much curbing here on my first lap or any lap. And again, curbing heights are very important. This delays some momentum from center to the exit of this right-hander, because now it's rebounding off. As you can see, it landed and it had to compress, and I had to stabilize with partial throttle, and had to stabilize with consistent wheel input. Okay, so using all the exit as I can, use all this curbing. I think it's plenty good enough for us just to keep momentum. Now our braking into the hairpin, our last true corner, is going to be a downshift from third to second. And I always find this compression point here as a marker to get the front end to not smack into the track too heavy. And it can if you use too much brake pedal too early, right? So you can see I'm in the braking phase, pretty much where the car is lined up with this curbing and this line, the end of this line. But we work into this phase in the compression zone now. So I'm just starting that transition just a little bit before the end of it. And now I'm downshifting from third to second, and you see I use some, RPM range to help, with the throttle to blip it, to make sure I'm not wheel hopping. And a lot of heavy braking, a lot of heavy straight braking, right? Heavy straight braking here. Now, very similar to all this hairpin that we had earlier in the lap. I want to make sure I'm getting off the brake at my max wheel angle, which you can see I'm working towards, and I'm completely off of it now. Very tight corner, and this is probably the tightest area on the track. because of how slow it is and how much the car and how really long of a corner it is at this slow speed. So now my objective here is partial throttle, and then once I start opening the wheel up, not to use too much throttle too early, because I don't want to push it tight in this section because of how much wheel I have. So my thinking is, it's simple. I want to make sure I'm not hitting this set of tires here, and once I get past that phase, I can start opening the wheel up and open it with more linear throttle. And in that whole phase, the car is balanced. I'm balancing it because I'm not using too heavy a throttle, and I'm not opening the wheel up too early, and I'm not pinching the car too much, causing it tight. So now I'm going to start opening it up. Luckily for our second gear, we have a lot of capability to get the full throttle, and this is pretty simple. I'm going to go second to third, and just maintaining some wheel spin later on. But right now we have the grip to just angle our really apex to the start finish line, okay? So that is a lap, just describing a lap, what I'm going through, and realistically, some of those areas where I got to the peak of those curbs, I cost myself probably about a tenth and a half to 2 tenths on this lap, right? So very difficult challenge of maintaining angles of this track, and that's just because of how tall these curbings are. Sometimes you need those curbings to help you point and turn, but then you delay your ability to get to throttle sooner because you're just ultimately, again, rebounding off those curbings and having to delay some lap time there. But with that said, I'm going to let lap 8 kind of play through here and doing a chase view, so you guys can see that in a different perspective. As you see, we have a lot of fall off here, right? Almost 2 seconds of fall off, truly, if I hit my marks on my first lap. Downshift to second, staying in second. Compared to the first lap, I have a lot less rear grip now. I'm staying partial throttle a lot longer in this phase. Third gear again, don't forget about this section. I'm always third gear in the S's. Still third gear. Second gear. Alright. I'm going to end it there for us this week for our Pro Track Guide at Sonoma. And again, difficult combination. Probably one of the most difficult combinations we can have for a road course, in this series. So if you guys have any questions or just want, to have some debrief with me this week, just don't be afraid to reach out and everything like that. So, but you guys have a good rest of your week. I look forward to working with you guys this week. So y'all have a good one.